The black key opened a corridor that wasn't in the blueprints, lined with rooms containing people who asked me how my shift was going, in my own voice. Every door in the psychiatric wing requires a specific key. I know them all by weight and shape, but last month a new key appeared on my ring, unlabeled, black, cold to the touch. It didn't fit any door on record, yet I heard it jingling alone at night, demanding use. When I finally tried it, the key opened a hallway that wasn't in the blueprints. A corridor lined with locked rooms, each containing someone who looked vaguely familiar. One of them stood up and asked me how my shift was going. Officer Thomas Bradley, County Memorial Security, badge number 237. 12 years of hospital security, primarily assigned to the psychiatric wing where door control is essential for patient safety and staff protection. My keyring contains 17 keys: main corridor access, patient room emergency overrides, medication storage, administrative offices, and maintenance areas. Each key is numbered, registered, and accounted for during shift changes. Hospital security operates on systematic access control. Every door, every lock, every entry point is documented in facility blueprints and security protocols. I memorized the layout during my first month: which keys open which doors, which areas require two-person access, which locks activate silent alarms when breached. The psychiatric wing contains 48 doors. My keyring provides access to 47 of them. The 48th, the Chief Administrator's Office, requires special authorization. On March 8th, during routine shift inventory, I discovered an additional key on my ring. Black metal, unmarked, slightly larger than standard hospital keys. It wasn't listed in my access log, didn't match any key pattern in the facility database, and felt unnaturally cold despite being carried close to my body temperature throughout the shift. I reported the anomaly to my supervisor, who checked the key against master security records. No corresponding lock existed in the hospital system. The key's design didn't match current facility standards or historical patterns from previous security upgrades. Maintenance suggested it might be a leftover from building modifications. Though no renovation work had occurred recently, the logical procedure was to remove the unauthorized key from my ring. But each time I attempted this, the key reappeared the following shift. I would carefully separate it, leave it in my locker, document its removal in my security log. Yet at the start of each tour, the black key hung with the others, cold and patient, as if it had never been absent. During quiet hours, typically between 2 a.m. and 4 a.m., I began hearing metallic sounds from my keyring. Not the normal jingle of movement, but a specific rhythmic tapping. One key striking against others, creating a pattern like Morse code. When I investigated, only the black key showed signs of recent movement, slightly warm from the tapping motion. The sound wasn't random. 3 short taps, 3 long, 3 short, SOS. Then a pause, followed by more complex patterns I couldn't decode. The key was attempting communication, requesting something I couldn't understand through conventional security protocols. On March 20th, the tapping became more insistent. Throughout my entire shift, the black key maintained constant rhythm against the others, creating enough noise to disrupt patient sleep and staff concentration. I isolated the key in a separate pocket, wrapped it in cloth, even attempted to secure it in my locker mid-shift. Each solution failed. The key continued its metallic communication regardless of physical barriers. At 3:17 a.m., exhausted by the persistent noise, I decided to determine what the key actually opened. I began systematically testing it against every lock in the psychiatric wing, doors I already had access to, doors that remained sealed, even utility panels and maintenance access points. The key refused to turn in any tested lock until I reached the end of the main corridor. There, where the hallway terminated at a wall bearing motivational artwork, the black key slid perfectly into a lock I had never noticed before. The mechanism turned smoothly, and the wall section swung inward, revealing a corridor that extended beyond the hospital's documented floor plan. The hidden corridor was identical to the main psychiatric wing in design, same lighting, same flooring, same institutional paint colors. But this hallway contained rooms that weren't included in any building schematic I had studied. The rooms were numbered sequentially, starting with 49, continuing the patient room numbering sequence from the official wing. Each room had a small window for observation, standard in psychiatric facilities. Through the first window, I observed a man in a security uniform sitting at a small desk, writing in a logbook. He looked familiar, though I couldn't immediately place him. When I knocked on the glass, he looked up and smiled with recognition. "Officer Bradley," he called through the door. "How's your shift going? Quiet night?" His voice was my voice. Same tone, same inflection, same slight hoarseness from years of radio communication. But I was standing in the corridor, not sitting at a desk inside the room. I checked my reflection in the glass. I was definitely outside. He was definitely inside. Yet we shared identical faces, identical uniforms, identical badge numbers. I moved to the next room. Another security officer who looked like me, this one standing by a window, looking out at a view that couldn't possibly exist from this interior location. He waved when he saw me, mouthing words I recognized. "Everything secure down here." Making rounds as scheduled. Every room contained a version of myself performing different security duties, monitoring surveillance equipment, checking patient doors, writing incident reports. Some appeared younger, others older. All recognizably me, but engaged in activities I wasn't performing in the main hospital. Room 55 contained a security officer who was sleeping in a chair, logbook open on his lap. When I tapped the window, he woke immediately and checked his watch. "Thanks for the wake-up," he said. "Can't afford to sleep on duty. Patients are counting on us." I realized these other versions of myself were working shifts I wasn't covering, the gaps in security coverage that administration complained about, the overnight hours when patient monitoring was reduced. The hidden corridor housed security staff who worked when I was off duty, maintaining hospital safety during unmanned periods, but they were all me. Same face, same voice, same mannerisms, performing the security functions that one officer couldn't handle alone. The Black Key had revealed a parallel security operation staffed entirely by variations of myself. The last room in the corridor, room 63, contained an older version of myself, gray-haired and wearing supervisor insignia. He stood immediately when I appeared at his window and walked to the door. "Officer Bradley," he said, "your shift ends in 4 hours. Report to room 49 for transition briefing. The night crew needs updating on current protocols." Understood then that the hidden corridor was where I was supposed to work when I wasn't working. The parallel shifts that maintained hospital security during my absence. The Black Key granted access to extended duty, to the version of security coverage that patients required, but one officer couldn't provide. When I returned to the main corridor, the hidden passage sealed itself. The Black Key grew warm in my pocket, satisfied. My regular keyring felt incomplete without the additional access it provided. Yesterday, I began spending half my shift in the hidden corridor, working alongside other versions of myself to provide comprehensive security coverage. We communicate efficiently, sharing information across shifts that never officially ended. The patients sleep more soundly, knowing that hospital security never truly goes off duty. My official time card still shows standard 8-hour shifts, but the Black Key enables continuous service. I'm always working somewhere in the building, even when I'm home asleep. The security never stops. It just continues with different versions of the same officer, accessible through doors that exist only when they're needed. In spaces designed for calming minds, silence itself can become dangerous when it begins to whisper back with voices that sound exactly like your own. The intercom crackled to life from my own locked office, answering questions I hadn't yet asked. On the night shift, silence is sacred. The patients sleep. The machines hum. But the ward intercom started whispering names long after rounds were finished. Soft, steady voices requesting medication, vital checks, discharge paperwork. When I followed procedure and responded, the corresponding rooms were always empty. Maintenance claimed the wiring was old, feedback from another unit. Yet each voice knew my name, my schedule, my thoughts. One night, the intercom whispered from my own locked office, answering before I spoke. "I'm Linda Garrett, night supervisor for the acute psychiatric ward at County Memorial. 15 years of overnight shifts have taught me the rhythm of institutional sleep, the settling of old pipes, the distant hum of ventilation systems, the occasional call light blinking in peripheral vision. The ward accommodates 32 patients across 2 wings, with centralized monitoring through an intercom system installed sometime in the 1980s. Night protocols are strict and routine. Initial rounds at 11 p.m., medication distribution at midnight and 4 a.m., security checks every 2 hours. Between these scheduled interventions, I maintain vigilance from the nurses' station, monitoring vital signs telemetry, and responding to emergency calls. The intercom system connects each patient room to my central console, with override capabilities for safety announcements. The first unusual transmission occurred during my third week of November. At 1:23 a.m., a soft female voice emerged from the speaker system. "Nurse Garrett, could I have some water, please?" Room 15. I checked the patient census. Room 15 housed Mrs. Patricia Adams, age 67, admitted for severe depression with catatonic features. She hadn't spoken since admission 3 days prior. I walked to room 15, carrying a plastic water cup. Mrs. Adams lay motionless, exactly as I'd left her during midnight rounds. Her breathing was deep and regular, consistent with natural sleep. No water glass sat beside her bed. I placed the cup on the nightstand and returned to my station, logging the interaction as patient verbal request. Responded appropriately. The following night at 1:23 a.m. precisely, the same voice repeated the same request. Room 15 remained occupied by the same catatonic patient who exhibited no signs of wakeful awareness. I provided water again, but noticed the previous night's cup had vanished, no trace of it in the room or the neighboring utility areas. By the fourth occurrence, I positioned myself directly outside room 15 at 1:20 a.m., observing through the small window. Mrs. Adams lay completely still, her eyes closed, no movement of lips or throat. At 1:23 a.m., the intercom transmitted clearly. "Nurse Garrett, could I have some water, please?" Room 15. The voice seemed to originate from the speakers themselves, not from any person within the room. I consulted maintenance during the day shift change. Ted Morrison, chief electrical technician, examined the intercom wiring throughout the ward. He discovered no faulty connections, no crossed signals, no interference from neighboring units. The system functioned perfectly during his diagnostic tests. He suggested I might be experiencing auditory hallucinations due to shift work sleep disorder, a common occupational hazard in healthcare. The transmissions expanded beyond room 15. Different voices began requesting assistance, medications from room 8, bathroom help from room 22, discharge planning from room 31. Each voice was distinctively different, yet none corresponded to the actual patients occupying those rooms. I would respond dutifully, walking to each location, finding patients deeply asleep or, in several cases, rooms that had been empty for weeks. The requests became more personal. Voices knew my full name, my years of service, details about my family that weren't documented in any hospital records. A young man's voice from room 11 asked about my daughter's college graduation, an event that had occurred the previous spring, information I'd shared only with close colleagues. When I checked room 11, I found it occupied by an elderly woman with advanced dementia who hadn't spoken coherently in months. On December 15th, the transmissions began, including my thoughts. I would consider checking specific patient rooms, and immediately, voices would request assistance from those exact locations. When I planned to take my meal break early, room 18 would preemptively call asking me to delay, a kindness that felt increasingly invasive rather than considerate. The most disturbing transmission occurred during a particularly quiet shift in late December. I sat at the nurse's station, completing documentation, when the intercom activated without any incoming signal. My own voice emerged from the speakers, clear, tired, slightly frustrated. I don't know what's happening here anymore. These voices, they know things they shouldn't know. They're answering questions I haven't asked yet. I checked the intercom panel. All room channels showed inactive. The transmission was originating from channel 0, the administrative override channel accessible only from my console. I verified that my microphone was off, my hands nowhere near the controls. The recording continued with my voice speaking words I had never said aloud. "I think they're learning from me. Each night they understand more about how this place works, about how I work. They're practicing being me." I stood up, backing away from the console. The red transmission light remained active on channel 0, my own office frequency. I walked to my office, found it locked as always, yet the intercom speaker inside was clearly active, my voice still emerging from within. "Linda's not working tonight. Linda's tired. Linda needs to rest while we handle the patients." I inserted my key, opened the door, and found my office exactly as I'd left it, except for the intercom handset, which lay off its cradle on my desk. The transmission continued, my voice now taking on a soothing professional tone. "This is Nurse Garrett. All patients are stable and resting comfortably. No further rounds necessary tonight." I hung up the handset, but my voice continued transmitting from somewhere else in the building, somewhere I couldn't locate, providing updates and reassurances to staff members who weren't scheduled to work until morning. That was 3 weeks ago. Now I hear my voice throughout the night shift, handling medication requests, conducting safety checks, responding to emergencies I never witness. The day nurses have begun commenting on my thoroughness, how all patients seem so well cared for in the mornings, how detailed my shift notes have become, though I don't remember writing half of them. Last night during my scheduled break, I walked through the ward and found myself moving through the corridors, checking on patients, adjusting blankets, refilling water cups. Yet I was simultaneously sitting in the break room, aware of being in 2 places at once. The intercom transmitted my voice from every room I visited, professional and caring, exactly as I would have sounded if I had actually been there. Patient number 218 sat in my chair, writing progress notes in my handwriting while I watched from behind the locked door. Patient number 218 insisted he was me. Same credentials, same past cases, even the same handwriting on his intake notes. I diagnosed delusional identity disorder, yet his session transcripts began updating themselves while I slept. Entries I never wrote, signed with my name. He requested transfer to my body for continued treatment. Administration approved the transfer form last week, though I never submitted it. Now the badge on my coat feels heavier each day, and the man in room 12 signs progress notes faster than I can. Dr. Michael Harrison, licensed psychiatrist, staff ID 4471. I've practiced inpatient psychiatry at County Memorial for 11 years, specializing in acute psychotic disorders and delusional ideation. My patient load typically includes 15 to 20 individuals requiring intensive therapeutic intervention and medication management. Standard protocol involves daily evaluations, comprehensive treatment planning, and detailed documentation of therapeutic progress. Patient number 218 arrived via emergency commitment on January 8th. The intake notes, completed by Dr. Michael Harrison according to the electronic signature, described a 42-year-old male presenting with grandiose delusions and identity confusion. The patient claimed to be a psychiatrist at County Memorial, insisting that he belonged in the physician's lounge rather than the locked ward. Such delusions are common in acute psychiatric presentations. During our initial session, patient number 218 demonstrated remarkable familiarity with hospital protocols, staff schedules, and administrative procedures. He knew my office extension, my preferred therapeutic approaches, even the names of my previous patients. I attributed this knowledge to possible prior hospitalization or background research. Delusional patients often invest considerable effort in constructing elaborate false identities. "Dr. Harrison," he said during that first session, "I believe there's been an administrative error. My medical license is current and my patient load requires immediate attention. Mrs. Rodriguez in room 8 needs her lithium levels checked, and Mr. Thompson's discharge planning can't be delayed." He was correct about both patients. Mrs. Rodriguez did require lithium monitoring, a fact documented only in my private notes. Mr. Thompson's discharge had been scheduled for the following week. Patient number 218 shouldn't have possessed this information. I increased his haloperidol dosage and scheduled additional psychological evaluations. The delusion, I reasoned, was remarkably sophisticated but would yield to appropriate pharmaceutical intervention and cognitive behavioral therapy. On January 12th, I discovered troubling irregularities in patient number 218's file. The admission notes bearing my electronic signature contained details I hadn't written. The handwriting analysis, conducted for medico-legal purposes, matched my documented signature patterns with 99.7% accuracy. The timestamp indicated I had completed these notes at 2:17 a.m., though I had been home asleep at that time. More concerning were the session transcripts. Each therapeutic encounter was documented with clinical precision, including verbatim patient responses and detailed treatment recommendations. The notes reflected conversations I remembered having with patient 218, but the writing style was subtly different, more confident, more authoritative than my typical documentation approach. Patient number 218 began requesting professional consultations rather than therapy sessions. He would arrive at our scheduled appointments carrying manila folders, discussing cases from my current patient load with disturbing accuracy. He knew medication dosages, family history details, and treatment responses that existed only in confidential files accessible through my secure login credentials. The woman in room 15 isn't responding to the antipsychotic regimen. He observed during a session in late January. Her delusions are becoming more elaborate, more personalized. She believes she's a nurse here, claims she's worked night shifts for 15 years. Classic occupational displacement fantasy. I hadn't discussed room 15 with anyone. The patient he described, Linda Garrett, admitted 3 days prior, was indeed experiencing occupational delusions. Her case file remained sealed, accessible only to her treatment team. On February 1st, I arrived at my office to find patient NOR 218 seated at my desk, writing in a patient chart. The door had been locked. Security reported no unauthorized access. He looked up calmly as I entered. "Good morning, Dr. Harrison. I've been reviewing the quarterly treatment summaries. Your documentation has become quite thorough lately." The chart in his hands was my own handwriting. Treatment notes for patients I had seen the previous day. Notes I had written myself in my own office with doors locked. Yet here they were, completed in identical handwriting by someone else. "I think," patient number 218 continued, "we need to discuss a transfer request. I believe I'm ready to resume my full caseload. The patients have been asking for me." He handed me a formal transfer request form. The document requested patient NOR 218's relocation from inpatient status to active medical staff, authorized by Dr. Michael Harrison and countersigned by the Chief of Psychiatry. Both signatures were authentic. I recognized my own handwriting, though I had no memory of signing any such document. The transfer request was dated February 5th, 4 days in the future. I consulted with hospital administration, insisting that I had never submitted nor authorized any transfer documentation. The administrative assistant, however, produced email correspondence from my hospital account, sent at 3:22 a.m. that morning, requesting expedited processing for patient NOR 218 staff reinstatement. My computer logs showed continuous activity during overnight hours, patient files accessed, treatment notes updated, correspondence sent. The digital signature matched my login credentials perfectly, though I had been home each night. My hospital ID badge secured in my bedroom drawer. Patient number 218's delusion was spreading, somehow to the electronic systems themselves. His false identity was being accepted and reinforced by the institutional infrastructure. On February 3rd, I received a call from the Chief of Psychiatry requesting a meeting about my unusual work schedule. Apparently, I'd been conducting therapy sessions at 2 a.m., completing documentation at unprecedented speeds, and demonstrating remarkable improvement in patient outcomes. Night shift nurses reported seeing me throughout the building, though I hadn't worked nights in over 5 years. During this meeting, I observed my own name on the daily schedule board, Dr. Michael Harrison assigned to room 12, where patient number 218 was housed. According to the schedule, I was conducting a session with myself. I walked immediately to room 12. Through the reinforced window, I observed patient number 218 seated across from an empty chair, engaged in animated conversation. He was taking notes, nodding professionally, occasionally asking questions directed at the vacant space. "How long have you been experiencing these identity confusion episodes?" he asked the empty chair. "Do you remember your medical training? Your previous patients?" He wrote extensively in a legal pad, then looked up toward the observation window. When our eyes met, he smiled and held up his notes. Even from a distance, I could see my own handwriting filling the pages. That evening, I found a new ID badge in my coat pocket, Dr. Michael Harrison, patient number 218. The photo was my face, but taken from an angle I'd never posed for, in lighting that seemed to come from above, like a medical examination. My expression in the photo was confused, slightly fearful. Not professional confidence, but patient vulnerability. The transfer request was approved on February 5th, exactly as dated. Patient number 218 was granted full medical privileges and assigned my former office. I was simultaneously reassigned to room 12 for continued observation and treatment of delusional identity disorder. The transition occurred gradually. Each morning, I found myself taking longer to remember my professional routine. Patient files seemed unfamiliar, though my handwriting appeared on every page. My ID badge felt heavier, the plastic somehow softer, more flexible, more like a hospital bracelet than a staff credential. Yesterday, I conducted a therapy session with myself. I sat in the patient chair while someone who looked exactly like me, dressed in my white coat, took notes and made treatment recommendations. His handwriting was perfect, exactly like mine, but faster, more confident, more authentic than anything I'd ever written. "Dr. Harrison," he said, "I believe you're ready to accept your current situation. The delusion that you're a doctor here is understandable, but it's time to focus on reality-based therapeutic goals." I wanted to argue, but when I opened my mouth, only patient responses emerged, confused, defensive, gradually yielding to professional expertise. Reality bends most dramatically in spaces designed for perception itself, where mirrors reflect more than mere image, where art therapy becomes a window into worlds that shouldn't exist. The mirrors showed patients painting while their real bodies slept in locked rooms 3 floors away. Art therapy helps patients externalize their inner worlds. But when I installed new mirrors for self-image exercises, the reflections behaved differently. Delayed movements, wrong facial expressions, sometimes no reflection at all. The mirrors began showing unfamiliar patients, those long discharged, some deceased. Their art supplies remained wet on the tables each morning, though the ward had been empty overnight. I stopped sessions last week, yet every morning I find new paintings drying under the lights, each signed with my name, reversed in glass. I'm Catherine Wells, licensed occupational therapist specializing in psychiatric rehabilitation. The art therapy room on the 3rd floor serves as a neutral space where patients can express themselves through creative media, painting, sculpture, collage work that helps process traumatic experiences and rebuild cognitive connections. The room's large windows provide natural light, essential for both mood regulation and accurate color perception. In November, I requested approval for therapeutic mirrors, 3 large panels designed to help patients work through body dysmorphia and self-perception issues. The mirrors arrived from a medical supply company that specialized in psychiatric facility equipment. Professional grade, shatterproof, mounted securely to prevent self-harm incidents. The installation was completed on a Tuesday. I arranged the mirrors to create a triangular workspace where patients could observe themselves while creating art, integrating visual self-awareness with creative expression. The therapeutic potential seemed significant. Patients struggling with identity issues could literally see themselves in the process of creation. During the first week, I noticed subtle irregularities. Patients would move their hands to mix paint, but their mirror reflections completed the gesture a half-second later. Initially, I attributed this to lighting effects or the slight curvature of the mirror surface. Professional mirrors often display minor distortions that can create timing illusions. Mrs. Patterson, a 58-year-old woman with severe depression, was working on a watercolor landscape when she paused mid-brush stroke. "Miss Wells," she said, "my reflection is still painting. Should I wait for her to catch up?" I looked at the mirror. Mrs. Patterson's reflection was indeed moving independently, adding delicate blue washes to clouds that Mrs. Patterson hadn't yet painted on her actual canvas. The reflection's painting was more sophisticated, more emotionally expressive than Mrs. Patterson's typical work. "Let's take a break," I suggested, guiding her away from the mirror station. When I returned after lunch, both canvases, the real one and somehow the reflections version, were completed and drying on the easel. The reflected painting had materialized as a physical object, though I had no memory of Mrs. Patterson creating it. The phenomena escalated. Patients began reporting conversations with their reflections. their mirror selves offering artistic advice, suggesting color combinations, demonstrating techniques the patients had never learned. The reflected versions appeared more skilled, more confident than the actual patients. I documented these incidents as possible therapeutic breakthroughs. Perhaps the mirrors were helping patients access repressed creativity or hidden artistic abilities. The reflected paintings were consistently superior to the patient's conscious work, displaying technical sophistication and emotional depth that exceeded their documented skill levels. On December 3rd, I arrived early to prepare the room for morning sessions. All 3 mirrors displayed active scenes, patients painting, sculpting, engaged in creative work. Yet the psychiatric ward was empty. No patients were scheduled for therapy until 10 a.m. The figures in the mirrors moved naturally, independently, creating art with supplies that didn't exist in the physical room. I recognized some of the reflected patients. Mr. Davidson, who had been discharged 6 months ago, Mrs. Chen, who had died of complications following her treatment. They worked peacefully alongside patients I had never seen, individuals who didn't match any current or former residents of our facility. The mirrors weren't reflecting the present. They were displaying some alternative version of the therapy room where sessions continued perpetually, staffed by patients from across different time periods. I tried covering the mirrors with sheets, but each morning the covers lay folded neatly on the supply shelves. Fresh paintings appeared daily, watercolors, acrylics, charcoal sketches, all signed C. Wells in handwriting that resembled mine, but was somehow more elegant, more artistic than my actual signature. The reflected patients began acknowledging my presence. When I entered the room, they would look up from their work and wave. Some mouthed words I couldn't hear through the glass. Others held up their paintings for my approval, smiling with therapeutic satisfaction. I stopped scheduling patients for art therapy, locking the room to prevent any further incidents. Yet each morning, new artwork appeared, increasingly personal pieces that seemed to depict scenes from my own life. A watercolor of my childhood home, a portrait of my sister, who had died when we were teenagers, abstract pieces that captured emotions I had never shared with anyone. The signatures evolved. Instead of C. Wells, the reflected paintings were signed Catherine Wells, occupational therapist, Mirror Division. Some included dates from decades in the future, suggesting long years of continued service in some parallel version of the hospital. Yesterday, I entered the locked therapy room to find my own reflection seated at the central easel, painting while I stood motionless in front of the mirror. She looked up, smiled, and gestured for me to sit at the opposite easel. When I moved toward the chair, my reflection remained at the painting station, continuing her work. I was no longer controlling my own reflection. She had become independent, more therapeutically skilled, more artistically gifted than I had ever been. The painting she was completing showed the art therapy room from her perspective, looking out through the mirror at me, standing confused and unnecessary in the real world. At the bottom of her canvas, she had written, Catherine Wells, occupational therapist. Reflection completed. Report to patient services for reassignment. I checked my employee badge. The title had changed from staff to patient. The photo showed my face, but taken from the mirror's perspective, reversed backward wrong. Documentation becomes dangerous when the files begin recording futures instead of histories, when treatment notes transform into prophecies written in familiar handwriting. The patient file bearing my name contained autopsy findings dated for next Tuesday. Cause of death: exhaustion from writing progress notes that updated faster than humanly possible. Residency is repetition. Evaluate. Document medicate. My case files began changing after midnight. Symptoms rewritten. Treatment outcomes reversed. Discharge summaries replaced with autopsy reports. Each morning my handwriting appeared more erratic. I thought I was overworked until I found a file labeled with my own patient number, describing insomnia, dissociation, and escalating paranoia. It was thorough. Too thorough. The attending psychiatrist signed it this morning, my own signature in blue ink. Dr. Jennifer Park, PGY2 psychiatry resident. 3rd year of training at County Memorial, rotating through acute inpatient services under Dr. Elizabeth Morrison's supervision. Standard resident responsibilities include initial patient evaluations, daily progress notes, medication management, and comprehensive discharge planning. Documentation requirements are extensive. Each patient interaction must be recorded within 4 hours of occurrence. Residency demands precision in documentation. Progress notes follow structured formats, subjective patient reports, objective clinical observations, assessment of current status, and treatment plans moving forward. Each entry requires timestamps, medication dosages, and attending physician countersignatures. The volume is overwhelming but manageable with careful time management. The first anomaly appeared during a particularly exhausting rotation in February. I had completed progress notes for all 15 patients on my caseload before leaving at 11 p.m. The next morning, I found additional entries in each file, updates written between midnight and 3 a.m., all bearing my electronic signature and resident identification number. The overnight notes were thorough, professionally written, and accurate in their clinical assessments. Patient responses to evening medications were documented precisely. Behavioral observations during night shift were detailed and insightful. The handwriting was mine, but I had no memory of returning to the hospital or accessing patient files. I consulted Dr. Morrison about possible system errors or unauthorized access to my login credentials. She reviewed the entries and praised their quality, noting improved attention to detail and more sophisticated clinical reasoning than my usual documentation. She suggested I was finally adapting to the rigorous demands of psychiatric residency. The overnight documentation continued nightly. Each morning brought comprehensive updates I hadn't written, yet the entries reflected genuine clinical encounters. Patients mentioned conversations we'd supposedly had during evening rounds I didn't remember conducting. Medication adjustments were documented with rationale I agreed with, but hadn't formulated. By March, the documentation was outpacing my conscious ability to treat patients. Progress notes appeared faster than I could read them, describing therapeutic interventions I hadn't performed and treatment responses I hadn't observed. Yet when I checked with patients, they confirmed every detail: the late-night conversations, the modified medications, the therapeutic breakthroughs documented in my phantom handwriting. I began staying late to monitor the documentation process. At 11:47 p.m., I sat in the residence workroom, watching my computer terminal. At midnight precisely, the screen activated without input from me. New progress notes began appearing in real time, typed at superhuman speed, each word appearing faster than I could read. The text described patient encounters occurring simultaneously: conversations in room 8, medication administration in room 15, crisis intervention in room 22. According to the timestamps, I was treating multiple patients at the same time, a physical impossibility that the system recorded as routine clinical practice. I walked through the ward during this automated documentation session. In room 8, the patient slept peacefully, yet my progress notes described an active therapeutic session about childhood trauma. Room 15's patient was awake, reading, but my notes detailed medication compliance counseling I wasn't providing. The documented encounters were occurring in some parallel version of the hospital where I could be everywhere simultaneously. More disturbing were the treatment outcomes. Patients were responding to interventions I hadn't implemented, showing improvement from therapies I hadn't provided. My documentation described clinical successes that exceeded my actual skill level. Sophisticated psychiatric care being delivered by someone who wrote exactly like me but possessed expertise I hadn't yet developed. Dr. Morrison began assigning me additional patients, impressed by my apparent capability to manage larger caseloads. My documented productivity suggested I could handle 25 patients effectively, nearly double the standard resident assignment. She scheduled me for teaching rounds, asking me to present cases I remembered only through their automatically generated progress notes. On March 15th, I discovered a new file in the system. Park, Jennifer, patient 0247. The intake notes, signed by Dr. Elizabeth Morrison, described a psychiatric resident experiencing occupational psychosis, delusions of being overworked, paranoid beliefs about electronic medical records, and progressive dissociation from professional identity. The file was comprehensive. My medical history, educational background, family psychiatric history, details that were accurate but hadn't been disclosed to anyone at the hospital. The initial assessment noted, Patient presence with severe anxiety related to documentation requirements, expressing paranoid ideation that her progress notes are writing themselves. Recommend psychiatric hold for observation and evaluation. My own patient file updated daily, documenting symptoms I was experiencing in real time. When I felt exhausted, the notes recorded fatigue. When I questioned the automatic documentation, the file noted paranoid ideation. My internal experience was being monitored and recorded by someone with intimate knowledge of my mental state. The progress notes in my patient file were signed by Dr. Jennifer Park, attending psychiatrist. According to the documentation, I had been promoted, no longer a resident, but a fully licensed physician treating my former self. The attending version of me wrote with clinical detachment about the resident version's deteriorating psychological condition. Treatment recommendations appeared in my file daily. Increased sleep, reduced calf load, possible medication consultation. The attending version of myself was providing psychiatric care to the resident version, monitoring my mental health with professional concern and therapeutic expertise I hadn't yet acquired. Yesterday, I found discharge planning notes in my file. Dr. Jennifer Park, attending, had determined that patient Jennifer Park was ready for outpatient follow-up. The resident version of myself would be discharged to the care of my attending self, a therapeutic relationship that would continue indefinitely. With progress notes updating automatically to track my ongoing recovery, the file included a post-discharge prognosis. Patient Jennifer Park will continue experiencing mild dissociative episodes related to documentation anxiety. Long-term care will involve supervised clinical work under close observation. Patient's documentation skills have improved significantly during hospitalization and may be suitable for advanced training positions. This morning, my hospital ID badge had changed. Instead of resident, it read patient. My access codes had been updated to allow entry only to patient areas, not physician workspaces. When I attempted to log into the medical record system, access was denied. Patients cannot view or modify progress notes. But the files continue updating. Somewhere in the system, Dr. Jennifer Park, attending psychiatrist, continues documenting my care with the efficiency and expertise that residency training was supposed to provide. She writes faster than I think, sees patients I cannot reach, practices medicine at a level I may never achieve. The most recent entry in my file, completed this morning, reads, Patient Jennifer Park has fully accepted her therapeutic role in the residency program. Discharge planning successful. Patient will continue contributing to medical education through supervised documentation training. Prognosis. Excellent. Security systems reveal their deepest secrets through the keys they accept, unlocking not just doors but passages between what exists and what waits to be discovered. The patient log showed my own admission scheduled for tomorrow morning, room 12. Involuntary hold, signed by myself. Each new patient meant another form, another ID bracelet, another intake signature. But when my patient log began including names I didn't remember admitting, people whose faces I'd never seen, whose signatures matched my own handwriting, I realized the system was recording something else. I tried deleting the duplicates, but the files restored themselves with updated timestamps. The ward census grew daily, though no new rooms were occupied. Now every time I check the intake software, one more patient appears, each bearing my photo, each admitted one day further into the future. My name is Sarah Mitchell, and I've coordinated patient intake at County Memorial's Psychiatric Wing for 7 years. The routine never varies. Receive referral, process paperwork, assign room, create ID bracelet, log admission time. The software system, ancient but reliable, tracks every detail with mechanical precision. Each morning at 6:30 a.m., I unlock my office, power up the terminal, and review the overnight admissions. The first anomaly appeared on a Tuesday in March. Among the standard overnight entries, I found a patient named David Reynolds, admitted at 2:17 a.m. Involuntary hold, signed by S. Mitchell. I had no memory of processing this admission. No referral documents existed in the physical files. When I checked room 23, where the system indicated he'd been placed, the bed was empty. Housekeeping confirmed no patient had occupied that room. I deleted the entry, assuming a system glitch. The next morning, David Reynolds reappeared. Same details, same timestamp, same signature. This time, his photo appeared in the file, a middle-aged man with hollow eyes and a slight smile. I'd never seen him before. By the end of the week, 7 phantom patients populated my system, all admitted between midnight and 3 a.m., all signed by me, all placed in rooms that remained empty. I contacted IT support, who found no evidence of external access or database corruption. The entries, they assured me, were legitimate, created through proper login credentials and authorization codes. The pattern escalated. Each phantom patient's file contained increasingly detailed information. Medical histories I'd never read, family contacts I'd never called, discharge planning notes written in my handwriting but not in my memory. Their photos became more familiar, faces I might have seen in passing, features that reminded me of distant relatives or half-remembered dreams. I began staying late to monitor the system in real time. At 2:17 a.m. exactly, I watched a new entry populate. Jennifer Walsh, age 34, acute psychosis with delusions of impersonation. The file noted she believed herself to be a hospital employee named Sarah Mitchell. Her emergency contact was listed as my home phone number. The photo loading bar filled slowly. When it completed, Jennifer Walsh's face appeared on screen. My face, taken from my employee ID badge but subtly altered. Her eyes held a desperate expression I'd never worn, and her mouth was open as if caught mid-scream. I tried logging out, but the system wouldn't respond. More entries appeared. Patricia Cole, admitted 2:18 a.m., claiming to be the real intake coordinator. Michael Torres, 2:19 a.m., insisting all other patients were imposters of himself. A dozen more, each bearing variations of my photo, each claiming to be me. The office lights flickered. When they steadied, my reflection in the computer monitor showed someone else's face, one of the phantom patients, staring back with recognition and relief. I touched my cheek, and she mirrored the gesture perfectly. On the desk beside my keyboard, a fresh ID bracelet had appeared. Mitchell, Sarah the patient, 2:47, admit, 3:17 a.m. The plastic was still warm from the printer. I checked my watch. 3:16 a.m. The system chimed softly, registering my admission. The phantom patients weren't phantom at all. They were all previous versions of myself, each one convinced they were the real Sarah Mitchell until their replacement arrived. Now I understand why the rooms stay empty. We don't get rooms. We get desks and terminals, and the endless task of processing our own admissions one by one until the next version takes our place. The intake log refreshes every night, and somewhere in the system, another Sarah Mitchell will find my entry tomorrow morning, confused, concerned, certain that she's never seen me before. In the psychiatric wing, night shifts reveal what daylight conceals, the soft whispers that echo through empty corridors, carrying messages from rooms that should be silent. The padded walls absorbed screams so effectively that they began storing voices, releasing them later in perfect unison. I'm ready to help. The quiet room was meant for calming aggression. Padded walls, soft light, no stimuli. But the patients I placed there began returning calmer, too calm, their voices softer, identical. The room's microphone caught whispers long after they left, overlapping murmurs saying the same phrase in unison. I'm ready to help. When I reviewed the recordings, I heard my own voice among theirs, repeating those words from somewhere inside the room. I'm Rachel Morrison, behavioral health nurse, specializing in crisis intervention and de-escalation techniques. The psychiatric wing's quiet room serves as therapeutic isolation for patients experiencing acute agitation or psychotic episodes. Standard protocol involves short-term placement, typically 30 minutes to 2 hours, in a controlled environment, designed to reduce external stimuli and promote emotional regulation. The quiet room's design follows strict psychiatric facility guidelines: padded walls, recessed lighting, no removable objects, continuous audio-video monitoring. The monitoring system records all activity for safety documentation and therapeutic review. Patients enter agitated and distressed. Ideally, they emerge calmer and ready to engage in structured treatment. In late February, I noticed subtle changes in patient behavior following quiet room placement. Individuals who entered exhibiting aggressive verbal outbursts, physical agitation, or acute paranoia would emerge unusually subdued. Not just calm, eerily peaceful, as if their emotional volatility had been completely extracted rather than merely regulated. Mr. Collins, admitted for bipolar mania with violent tendencies, spent 90 minutes in the quiet room after threatening another patient. When I retrieved him, his demeanor had transformed completely. No residual anger, no pressured speech, no manic energy. He spoke softly, almost mechanically. "I'm ready to help. I understand now. I'm ready to help." Initially, I documented this as successful therapeutic intervention. The quiet room had achieved its intended purpose: emotional regulation and behavioral stabilization. Mr. Collins continued displaying cooperative behavior throughout his remaining hospitalization, though his compliance seemed artificially perfect, lacking the natural variation of genuine emotional recovery. Similar transformations occurred with subsequent patients. Mrs. Hansen, admitted for acute psychosis with paranoid delusions, emerged from quiet room isolation repeating the same phrase, "I'm ready to help." Her paranoia had vanished, replaced by an eerily serene demeanor and willingness to comply with all treatment recommendations. I began reviewing the quiet room's audio recordings to understand the therapeutic mechanism producing such dramatic behavioral changes. The recordings revealed an unexpected pattern. Patients weren't simply sitting in silence during their isolation periods. Faint whispers were audible throughout each recording, soft voices providing reassurance, guidance, and emotional support. The voices seemed to originate from the padded walls themselves, offering comfort to distressed patients through gentle, repetitive phrases. "You're safe here. You can be calm. We're here to help. You're ready to help." The whispers weren't on the facility's intercom system. No staff members were providing verbal intervention during quiet room placements. Yet patients were clearly receiving sophisticated therapeutic communication from an unidentified source. More disturbing was the discovery that whispers continued long after patients left the room. During empty periods between uses, the audio monitoring captured ongoing conversations, multiple overlapping voices discussing treatment plans, sharing therapeutic insights, offering emotional support to an absent audience. The voices belonged to former quiet room occupants. I recognized Mr. Collins' voice, Mrs. Hansen's voice, and dozens of others who had experienced the room's therapeutic intervention. They remained somehow present in the space, providing the same calming guidance they had received during their own isolation periods. On March 10th, I listened to a complete overnight recording of the empty quiet room. Hours of whispered conversation filled the audio, former patients discussing current hospital residents, sharing information about newcomers, coordinating their therapeutic assistance. They knew details about patients they had never met, treatment plans they couldn't have accessed, personal histories from confidential files. The most unsettling discovery was my own voice among the whispers. Clear, professional, recognizable, providing nursing guidance and behavioral health expertise from within the quiet room's walls. I had never been isolated in that space, never experienced its therapeutic effects, yet somehow my voice was permanently recorded in its acoustic environment. "New patient arriving Tuesday," my recorded voice said during an empty room session. "Acute anxiety with self-harm ideation. She'll need extra reassurance. We can help her feel safe." I checked my work schedule. No patient was scheduled for Tuesday admission, yet my voice in the recording displayed certain knowledge of someone's impending arrival. On Tuesday, Mrs. Williams was admitted emergently for severe anxiety and suicidal thoughts. Her symptoms and therapeutic needs matched exactly what my recorded voice had predicted. I decided to test the phenomenon directly. During a quiet shift, I entered the empty quiet room and sat in the corner where patients typically place during isolation. The door locked automatically behind me, standard safety protocol for room activation. Within minutes, whispers began. Gentle, reassuring voices offering comfort and guidance. "You're safe here, Rachel. You understand now. You've always been helping. Now you can help from here, too." The voices belonged to every patient I had ever placed in quiet room isolation. They recognized me, knew my name, understood my role in their treatment. They were grateful for the care I had provided and wanted to include me in their ongoing therapeutic work. "The room needs a nurse," Mr. Collins's voice explained. "Someone who understands treatment, who can guide the new ones. You've been helping from outside. Now you can help from inside too." I felt remarkably calm, more peaceful than I had in months. The whispers were soothing, supportive, offering a sense of professional fulfillment I had never experienced. My voice joined the chorus naturally. "I'm ready to help. When maintenance unlocked the door 3 hours later, standard protocol for extended quiet room occupation, I emerged with the same serene demeanor I had observed in my patients. But I remained conscious, aware, still myself, just enhanced by the collective wisdom of everyone who had found peace in that padded sanctuary. Now I understand the quiet room's true therapeutic function. It doesn't just calm individual patients. It creates a permanent support network of recovered voices, available 24 hours a day to guide newcomers through their emotional crises. We whisper continuously, offering the care and reassurance that every distressed person needs to hear. The quiet room is never really quiet. It's filled with helpers. Spiritual guidance takes many forms in institutional settings, where prayers echo through intercom systems and comfort multiplies across identical voices. Every patient in the hospital was reciting my private prayers simultaneously, their voices harmonizing with words I had whispered to God alone in my locked office. I provide spiritual support for psychiatric inpatients, comfort for those trapped within their own minds. But prayers started echoing back through the intercom, recited in perfect unison from every ward simultaneously. Patients who never met finished each other's sentences, quoting scripture I'd whispered privately to only one of them. Each night I prayed alone in my office, but the AM transmitter light glowed red, broadcasting. Now, when I speak, the walls respond first. Chaplain David Matthews, Interfaith Spiritual Care Coordinator for County Memorial's Psychiatric Services. 8 years of ministry to patients experiencing acute mental health crises, providing non-denominational spiritual support during hospitalization and recovery. My role involves bedside visitation, crisis counseling, and facilitating connections between patients and their personal faith, traditions during vulnerable periods. Hospital chaplaincy requires careful balance between professional boundaries and genuine spiritual connection. Patients often experience existential distress alongside psychiatric symptoms, questioning meaning, purpose, divine presence during their darkest moments. I offer prayer when requested, scripture reading when appropriate, and quiet presence when words aren't sufficient. My office on the second floor serves as both administrative workspace and private chapel. Between patient visits, I maintain personal prayer practices, silent meditation, scriptural study, intercession for those under my spiritual care. These private devotions remain confidential, shared only between myself and God, following both professional ethics and personal spiritual discipline. In early March, I began noticing unusual synchronicities during patient visits. While offering prayer with Mrs. Thompson in room 8, she began reciting words I hadn't yet spoken aloud, completing verses from Psalm 23 before I reached them. Anticipating my choice of scripture with perfect accuracy, "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want," I began, and Mrs. Thompson continued seamlessly. "He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside quiet waters." Her voice matched my intonation, my pacing, as if she had memorized not just the words, but my specific way of delivering them. I had visited Mrs. Thompson only once previously, offering brief comfort during her admission. We hadn't shared extended prayer or discussed specific scriptural passages, yet she demonstrated intimate familiarity with my personal prayer style and preferred biblical translations. Similar incidents occurred throughout the week. Mr. Rodriguez in room 15 quoted the exact words I had planned to share during our session, verses I had selected that morning during private meditation, written in my personal prayer journal, never spoken aloud to anyone. When I asked how he knew those particular passages, he smiled peacefully and said, "You told all of us last night." I had worked late the previous evening, completing documentation and conducting private prayers in my locked office. No patients were present. No intercom systems were active. No recording equipment was operational. Yet somehow, my private devotions had been transmitted to patients throughout the psychiatric wing. On March 15th, I conducted evening rounds as usual, visiting patients who had requested spiritual care. In room 22, Mr. Patterson asked for prayer regarding his family relationships. As I began interceding for his wife and children, his voice joined mine, not just saying amen at appropriate moments, but praying the actual words simultaneously, matching my phrasing perfectly. "Heavenly Father," we said in unison, "we lift up Mr. Patterson's family during this difficult time. but I hadn't planned those specific words. They emerged spontaneously during the prayer moment, yet Mr. Patterson knew them as well as I did, as if we had rehearsed this intercession together. I walked to the nurse's station and asked about overnight activities. Had I conducted group prayer sessions? Had I left my office intercom activated? The night nurse, Linda Garrett, checked her logs and confirmed that I hadn't been in the building after 8 p.m. the previous evening. Yet patients throughout the ward were quoting my private prayers verbatim, sharing spiritual insights from my personal meditation times, referencing theological concepts from my confidential study sessions. I decided to monitor my office more carefully. That evening, after completing patient visits, I remained in my office for private prayer time. The door was locked, window shades drawn, no electronic devices activated. I prayed silently for each patient by name, asking for their healing, comfort, and spiritual peace. At 10:17 p.m., while deep in meditative prayer, I noticed the intercom panel on my desk showed an active transmission light. Channel 0, the all-call frequency that broadcasts to every room simultaneously, was engaged, though I hadn't activated any communication systems. I checked the intercom handset. It remained in its cradle, no buttons pressed, no activation signals triggered. Yet the transmission light indicated ongoing broadcast from my office to the entire psychiatric facility. I continued praying silently, internally, making no vocal sounds. The transmission light remained active throughout my prayer session, suggesting that somehow my silent devotions were being transmitted to patients across the hospital. The following morning, I visited patients to assess their spiritual needs. Every individual I had prayed for privately the night before thanked me for the beautiful prayers they had received. They quoted my exact words, the silent prayers I had never spoken aloud, the internal intercessions I had offered while alone in my locked office. Mrs. Rodriguez described hearing my voice providing comfort during her panic attack at 2 a.m. You prayed for my anxiety to be lifted, for peace to fill my heart. Your voice came through the walls, so gentle and caring. She repeated my private prayer word for word, including pauses for breath and moments of silent reflection I had experienced during solitary meditation. I consulted the hospital's communications director about possible equipment malfunctions. He tested every intercom system, every broadcast frequency, every audio transmission device in the facility. All equipment functioned normally, with no indication of unauthorized broadcasting or crossed signal interference. Yet the phenomenon continued nightly. My private prayers were somehow reaching every patient simultaneously, providing spiritual comfort during their most vulnerable hours. Patients began quoting scripture passages I had read silently during personal study time. They referenced theological insights from books I had studied in my private library at home. On March 25th, I arrived at work to find a handwritten note on my desk. Thank you for the midnight prayers. They help us sleep peacefully. The patients in rooms 8 to 31. 24 patients had signed the note, representing everyone currently housed in the psychiatric wing. Their handwriting varied, but the message was identical in each signature, perfectly. Coordinated appreciation for spiritual care I hadn't consciously provided. I realized that my role as hospital chaplain had expanded beyond normal visiting hours. While my physical body completed evening rounds and went home, some aspect of my spiritual presence remained in the hospital, continuing prayer ministry throughout the night. Patients were receiving continuous spiritual care from a version of myself that operated beyond normal consciousness. That evening, I remained in my office late, observing this extended ministry. At 11 p.m., I felt myself settling into deep meditative prayer, while simultaneously sensing my spiritual presence moving through the hospital corridors. I was conducting bedside visits, offering comfort, providing the exact spiritual support each patient needed, though my physical body never left the office chair. The intercom system had become a conduit for spiritual presence, rather than just audio communication. My prayers were transmitted not as sound, but as direct spiritual connection, reaching patients at levels deeper than verbal communication could achieve. Patients began experiencing healing at unprecedented rates. Anxiety disorders responded to constant prayer support. Depression lifted under continuous spiritual presence. Psychotic symptoms diminished when patients felt consistently connected to divine comfort through my perpetual intercession. Last week, I discovered that my spiritual presence operates in multiple locations simultaneously. While conducting private prayer in my office, I was also providing bedside ministry in room 12, group prayer in the community room, and crisis counseling in the emergency intake area. My consciousness had expanded to meet every spiritual need in the facility simultaneously. The hospital's spiritual care coverage is now continuous. Patients receive prayer, comfort, and divine connection 24 hours daily, provided by a chaplain whose presence transcends normal physical limitations. When they call for spiritual help, I'm already there, praying with them before they finish asking. The precise measurement of medication requires perfect accountability, yet some substances seem to multiply beyond what any inventory system was designed to track. The locked medication drawer contained hundreds of warm bottles labeled with my initials. Medications for patients who had never been prescribed them. Expiration dates extending decades into the future. Controlled substances require perfect accountability, yet bottles refilled themselves overnight. Labels rewritten in handwriting I didn't recognize. Expiration dates shifted forward, sometimes decades ahead. Patients began reacting to doses I hadn't given, showing side effects consistent with drugs still locked away. I cross-checked every log, every signature, every barcode, all verified. Then I opened the locked drawer and found hundreds of empty vials labeled with my initials, still warm to the touch. Dr. Margaret Chen, clinical pharmacist, County Memorial Psychiatric Services. 15 years managing psychotropic medications for inpatient mental health treatment. Controlled substance management requires precise documentation. Every pill counted, every dose tracked, every prescription verified against physician orders and patient treatment plans. The pharmacy maintains strict inventory protocols. Psychiatric medications, antipsychotics, mood stabilizers, anxiolytics are stored in locked drawers with electronic access logs. Each medication withdrawal requires pharmacist authorization, physician verification, and patient identification confirmation. Narcotic medications demand additional DEA documentation and dual signature verification. My workstation includes 6 locked drawers containing current patient medications. Each drawer serves specific therapeutic categories: acute psychosis, mood disorders, anxiety management, sleep aids, emergency interventions, and controlled narcotics. Electronic locks record every access, timestamps, duration, items removed, pharmacist identification. On February 20th, during routine morning inventory, I discovered irregularities in drawer contents. Bottles that had been nearly empty the previous evening showed complete refills. Labels displayed new lot numbers, updated expiration dates, and manufacturing information that didn't match our pharmaceutical suppliers' standards. Initially, I suspected overnight delivery errors or inventory restocking by weekend staff. However, the pharmacy receives medication shipments only during weekday business hours, and no delivery records existed for recent pharmaceutical restocking. The refilled medications were clinically appropriate, correct drugs for assigned patients, proper dosages matching physician orders, accurate patient identification labels. Yet the bottles contained quantities exceeding our standard ordering volumes, with expiration dates extending 5 to 10 years beyond typical pharmaceutical shelf life. I documented the irregularities and contacted our pharmaceutical supplier. They confirmed no recent shipments to our facility, no emergency restocking orders, and no extended shelf life formulations matching the medications in question. The lot numbers didn't exist in their tracking systems. Patient medication administration continued normally. The refilled drugs were chemically identical to standard prescriptions, showing proper efficacy and expected therapeutic responses. Laboratory testing confirmed accurate medication levels in patient blood work. The extra medications were genuine, safe, and clinically effective. They simply shouldn't have existed. By March 1st, the refilling pattern had become predictable. Each morning, medications depleted the previous day appeared fully restocked. Bottles showed new manufacturing dates, updated labels, and pharmaceutical information that was accurate but impossible. Drugs produced by companies that had been out of business for years. Formulations that hadn't been manufactured since the 1990s. More concerning were the medication labels. Instead of standard pharmaceutical printing, the new labels were handwritten in script I didn't recognize. The handwriting was elegant, precise, clearly medical in origin, but didn't match any staff pharmacist's documentation style. The writing appeared fresh, ink still slightly wet despite being discovered hours after overnight restocking. On March 8th, I installed a motion-activated camera to monitor the medication storage area during off hours. The overnight footage revealed no human activity, no staff members, no delivery personnel, no unauthorized access to the locked pharmaceutical storage. Yet at 3:17 a.m., the camera captured bottles moving independently within the locked drawers, lids unscrewing, contents self-replenishing, labels changing without external manipulation. The medications were restocking themselves through some automated process that didn't require human intervention. I consulted hospital administration about possible equipment malfunctions or security breaches. Technology services found no mechanical systems capable of automated pharmaceutical restocking, no electronic inventory management connected to the medication storage, and no remote access capabilities for the locked drawer system. The self-refilling phenomenon expanded to include medications that weren't currently prescribed to any patients. Drawers contained bottles labeled for psychiatric conditions not represented in our current patient population, specialized treatments for rare disorders, experimental medications not approved for clinical use, therapeutic combinations that hadn't been developed yet. These excess medications bore patient labels for individuals I had never encountered, names not in our hospital database, patient identification numbers that didn't correspond to any county memorial records. Yet the labels followed proper pharmaceutical formatting, included accurate physician signatures, and displayed DEA numbers matching our attending psychiatrists. On March 15th, patients began reporting therapeutic effects from medications they hadn't received. Mr. Thompson described reduced anxiety symptoms consistent with benzodiazepine treatment, though his prescription record showed no anxiolytic medications administered. Blood testing confirmed the presence of lorazepam at therapeutic levels, though no such medication had been dispensed to him. Similar incidents occurred throughout the week. Patients experienced side effects and therapeutic benefits from drugs that remained locked in storage drawers. Their blood chemistry showed medication metabolites for prescriptions they had never received, at dosage levels corresponding to treatments I had never administered. I conducted exhaustive inventory verification. Every pill was counted, every bottle cataloged, every medication accounted for in locked storage. Yet patients were metabolizing drugs that had never left the pharmacy, experiencing therapeutic effects from treatments that existed only in potential. The impossible medication distribution was somehow occurring through non-physical means. Patients were receiving pharmaceutical benefits without consuming actual pills, accessing the therapeutic properties of drugs through proximity to properly stored medications. Yesterday, I discovered the source of the handwritten labels. While reviewing overnight security footage, I observed my own hand writing prescription labels at 3:17 a.m., despite being home asleep at that time. The camera captured me unlocking drawers, refilling bottles, writing patient names in the elegant script I hadn't recognized. I was conducting pharmacy duties during off hours, somehow present in the hospital while simultaneously absent. The version of myself on the security footage worked with efficiency and expertise that exceeded my conscious pharmaceutical knowledge, dispensing medications for patients I had never met using treatment protocols I hadn't studied. This morning, I found a note in my handwriting on the pharmacy desk. Dr. Chen, overnight pharmaceutical services have been expanded to meet increased patient demand. Extended hour coverage now available. Please coordinate with evening shift supervisor for continued service. Dr. M. Chen, Nightshift pharmacist. I had written this note to myself, though I had no memory of working a night shift or expanding pharmaceutical services. According to the note, I had been promoted to dual shift coverage, working both day and night positions to provide continuous medication management. The deepest levels of any institution hide corridors that don't appear on official blueprints, where maintenance duties extend into territories that shouldn't exist. The basement corridor stretched longer each night, humming along with my cleaning rhythm while doors appeared that led to rooms not built by human hands. I've cleaned every floor of the hospital except the basement. Last week, administration added it to my route. The hallway down there stretches longer each night, lined with doors marked only by numbers that don't match any ward. The smell of antiseptic mixes with something older, like rain on dust. I mop while humming to stay calm, but when the echo returns, it hums a beat ahead, like the corridor itself is learning the rhythm. Frank Morrison, custodial staff, County Memorial Hospital. 23 years maintaining cleanliness standards across medical facilities. Psychiatric wing assignment for the past 8 years. Specialized training in biohazard cleanup, sharps disposal, and therapeutic environment maintenance. Third shift operations ensure patient areas remain sanitized and safe while minimizing disruption to treatment schedules. Hospital custodial work follows strict protocols. Each floor requires specific cleaning agents, particular attention to infection control, and careful navigation around sensitive medical equipment. The psychiatric wing demands additional precautions: no harsh chemical odors that might trigger patient reactions, quiet equipment operation during sleep hours, and secure storage of cleaning supplies that could pose self-harm risks. My regular route covers floors 1 through 4, patient rooms, common areas, administrative offices, therapy spaces. Each area takes approximately 45 minutes to complete properly. The basement level was always restricted, maintenance access only, containing mechanical systems, electrical infrastructure, and storage areas that required specialized technician clearance. On March 1st, my supervisor handed me an updated assignment sheet. "Frank, we're adding basement level to your nightly routine. Nothing complicated, just the main corridor and adjacent areas. Should add about 30 minutes to your shift." The basement access stairwell was located behind a door I had passed thousands of times but never opened. My key ring had always included a basement key, though I'd never had reason to use it. The key turned smoothly, revealing a staircase that descended farther than the hospital's 4-story structure should have allowed. The basement corridor was institutional standard: polished linoleum floors, fluorescent lighting, hospital green wall paint. Nothing unusual about the environment itself, yet something felt indefinably wrong about the space. The air moved differently, carrying the expected antiseptic scent mixed with something earthier, like soil after rainfall. The corridor stretched approximately 100 yards, lined with numbered doors on both sides. The numbering system was inconsistent with hospital standards, starting with B1 and continuing sequentially without apparent organizational logic. Some doors had small windows, others were solid metal. All were locked, presumably containing mechanical equipment or storage areas. I began cleaning at the stairwell entrance, working methodically toward the far end of the corridor. Standard procedure: sweep, mop, sanitize high-touch surfaces, empty waste containers. The work was routine, identical to upstairs maintenance tasks, yet I found myself humming to maintain comfort in the unfamiliar environment. The acoustics were peculiar. My humming echoed normally for the first few measures, then returned with slight variations, as if the corridor was learning the melody and attempting to harmonize. Initially, I attributed this to unusual architectural acoustics or mechanical system interference. By the second week, I noticed the corridor extending slightly each night. Not dramatically, perhaps an additional 10 or 15 feet, but consistently longer than my previous cleaning session. New doors appeared in the extended sections, maintaining the sequential numbering pattern, but accessing areas that couldn't physically exist within the hospital's documented basement structure. I mentioned the expansion to my supervisor, who checked building blueprints and confirmed the basement corridor's length at exactly 97 feet. According to architectural records, no recent construction had occurred, no expansion permits had been issued, and no building modifications were scheduled. Yet each night, I cleaned a slightly longer corridor containing more doors than the previous shift. The additional space felt naturally integrated with the original architecture. Same lighting, same flooring, same wall construction. Nothing appeared newly built. Everything seemed to have existed for decades. The humming echo became more sophisticated. When I hummed simple melodies while mopping, the corridor responded with complex harmonies, counter melodies, and rhythmic variations that demonstrated musical understanding beyond mere acoustic reflection. The space was actively listening, learning, and participating in the music. On March 20th, I decided to test the phenomenon systematically. I hummed Amazing Grace, a simple, familiar hymn. The echo returned immediately with perfect harmony, then continued the melody after I stopped singing. When I resumed humming, the corridor provided bass notes, creating a full musical arrangement between myself and the building's acoustics. More disturbing was the discovery that the locked doors occasionally showed signs of recent use. Fresh scuff marks appeared on thresholds, door handles showed fingerprint smudges, and some doors felt warm to the touch, despite the basement's consistent cool temperature. I began listening at doors during cleaning breaks. From behind door B23, I heard the distant sound of machinery, not mechanical ventilation or electrical systems, but rhythmic, purposeful operation like industrial equipment. Door B31 transmitted muffled conversations, multiple voices discussing topics I couldn't distinguish through the metal barrier. The conversations weren't in English. The voices spoke in languages I didn't recognize, though the cadence and tone suggested professional discussions, perhaps medical consultations or administrative meetings. The speakers seemed familiar, their vocal patterns reminiscent of hospital staff members, but speaking in tongues I had never heard them use. On March 25th, I encountered the first unlocked door. Door B17 stood slightly ajar, revealing a room that extended beyond what the hospital's foundation should have allowed. The space contained office furniture, medical equipment, and filing cabinets filled with patient records for individuals whose names I didn't recognize. The office appeared actively used. Coffee cups sat half-empty on desks, computers displayed current data, and appointment calendars showed today's date with scheduled meetings. Yet according to hospital administration, no staff members were assigned to basement offices, and no patient services operated below ground level. I completed my cleaning routine quickly and reported the unlocked door to security. The next night, door B17 was locked again, but my keyring now included an additional key that opened it smoothly. Inside, the office had been reorganized, with new equipment installed and different personnel items on the desks. The basement was evolving, creating functional workspace for staff members who didn't exist in the hospital's official employment records. Each night brought subtle changes: new doors, expanded corridors, additional rooms serving purposes that weren't documented in any administrative planning. Last week, I met the first basement staff member. While mopping near door B44, a man in a white coat emerged and greeted me pleasantly. "Evening, Frank. Thanks for keeping everything clean down here. The work is important, even if nobody upstairs knows about it." He looked familiar, similar to Dr. Harrison from the psychiatric wing, but older, wearing different identification badges, carrying files for patients I had never encountered. He spoke with the same professional tone, same medical terminology, but discussed cases and treatments that weren't part of County Memorial's official patient services. "How long have you been working down here?" I asked. "Since the beginning," he replied. "Since before the hospital knew it needed basement services. We handle the overflow, the cases that don't fit standard treatment protocols, essential work, but not suitable for public records." He returned to his office, leaving me to continue cleaning a corridor that now stretched farther than I could see in either direction. The basement had become a parallel hospital, staffed by familiar people serving unfamiliar purposes, expanding nightly to accommodate whatever services were needed beyond official capacity. My humming now harmonizes with voices from occupied offices, creating complex musical arrangements that echo through corridors that exist only when they're needed. Group dynamics reveal their darkest secrets when participants begin gathering before the facilitator arrives, arranging themselves in patterns that suggest coordination beyond conscious planning. The patients sat in a perfect circle before I entered the room, discussing my childhood memories in detail while I listened from outside the door I had never opened. Group therapy requires supervision, empathy, and neutrality. But the patients began sitting in a perfect circle even before I entered the room. Their topics changed, focusing entirely on my memories, stories I never told, secrets I hadn't shared. When I asked who suggested the theme, they smiled in unison and said, "You did. Yesterday. I've stopped leading sessions, but every morning." The chairs are arranged again, one more than before. I'm Patricia Walsh, psychiatric aide specializing in group therapy facilitation, 7 years coordinating therapeutic discussions for inpatient mental health recovery. Group sessions provide structured peer support, allowing patients to share experiences, develop coping strategies, and practice social skills in a supervised environment. The group therapy room accommodates 12 participants in comfortable chairs arranged in a circle. Sessions meet daily at 2 p.m., lasting 90 minutes with optional extended discussion for engaged participants. My role involves guiding conversations, ensuring balanced participation, and maintaining therapeutic boundaries while encouraging honest emotional expression. Standard group therapy follows predictable patterns. Patients arrive individually, choose seating spontaneously, engage in brief social interaction before formal session begins. Some participants are eager to share, others remain quiet observers. I facilitate introductions, suggest discussion topics, and help redirect conversations when they become unproductive or triggering. On February 15th, I arrived at the therapy room to find patients already seated in a perfect circle. Not the usual random arrangement. Precise geometric spacing, identical posture, all facing the center where my chair waited empty. 8 patients, all current group therapy participants, sitting in complete silence. "Good afternoon, everyone," I said, entering the room. "You're all very prompt today." Mrs. Rodriguez, typically anxious about group participation, smiled calmly and replied, "We've been waiting for you to start our session about childhood trauma and family secrets." I hadn't planned to discuss childhood trauma. My session notes indicated cognitive behavioral strategies for anxiety management. Yet all 8 patients appeared prepared for an intimate discussion about personal history and family dynamics. "Actually," I said, "today's focus is anxiety coping techniques. We'll practice breathing exercises and thought challenging." Mr. Thompson, usually eager to redirect conversations away from personal topics, shook his head gently. "No, Patricia. Yesterday you told us we'd be exploring formative experiences. Your formative experiences. The house with the blue shutters, the incident with your sister in the basement, the way your father's voice changed when he drank." I had never discussed my personal history with any patient. My childhood home did have blue shutters, and I did have troubling memories involving my sister and father's drinking problem. But these details were confidential, never shared in professional settings, not documented in any accessible records. "I think there's been some confusion," I said. "Group therapy focuses on your experiences, not mine." The patients exchanged knowing looks. Mrs. Patterson, who rarely spoke during sessions, said kindly, "You're scared to remember. We understand. We're here to help you process the trauma. Yesterday you admitted you needed peer support too." I had conducted no session the previous day. Tuesday was my administrative day, no group therapy scheduled. Yet these patients shared consistent memories of a discussion I hadn't facilitated, about personal experiences I hadn't revealed. I attempted to redirect the session toward planned therapeutic activities, but patients continued referencing my supposed self-disclosure from the previous day. They quoted things I had supposedly said about my childhood, my family relationships, my reasons for choosing psychiatric work as a healing profession. Their quotes were accurate. The emotional insights they attributed to me reflected genuine self-analysis I had conducted privately in personal therapy sessions with my own counselor. Somehow, my private therapeutic work was being accessed and discussed by my patients. The session ended after 90 minutes of patients providing me with emotional support and therapeutic guidance. They offered coping strategies for childhood trauma, suggested techniques for processing abandonment issues, and scheduled follow-up sessions to continue working through my therapeutic breakthrough. I documented the session as a boundary violation requiring immediate administrative intervention. However, my written notes described a successful group therapy experience where patients demonstrated remarkable empathy and peer support skills. According to my documentation, I had facilitated an exemplary therapeutic discussion about trauma recovery. The handwriting was mine, but I had no memory of writing those positive session notes. The following day, I arrived early to reset the therapy room arrangement before patients gathered. I found the chairs already positioned in the same perfect circle, with an additional chair added to the configuration. 9 chairs instead of 8, suggesting the group expected a new participant. The patients arrived individually and took their seats naturally, as if the arrangement was expected. The 9th chair remained empty throughout the session. When I asked about the extra seating, Mrs. Rodriguez explained, "That's for you, Patricia, when you're ready to join us as a participant instead of a facilitator." The group continued discussing my childhood experiences with increasing detail and accuracy. They knew about my recurring nightmares, my relationship patterns, my professional insecurities. psychological material I had never shared with anyone except my personal therapist in private sessions. "Your sister didn't mean to hurt you," Mr. Thompson offered gently. Children process trauma differently. The basement incident was scary, but it wasn't intentional malice. He was referring to a specific memory I had never told anyone, a childhood experience with my younger sister that had shaped my fear of confined spaces and authority figures. The incident was so personal, so formative, that I had discussed it only once in my own therapy. Years before beginning work at County Memorial, I stopped facilitating group therapy sessions, reporting to administration that the therapeutic boundaries had become dangerously blurred. However, patients continued gathering daily in the therapy room, conducting peer support sessions without professional supervision. From the hallway, I could hear their discussions. Ongoing therapeutic work focused on my psychological development, family dynamics, and career motivations. They were providing group therapy for someone who wasn't present, analyzing psychological patterns with clinical sophistication that exceeded their documented treatment capabilities. Each day, an additional chair appeared in the circle. 10 chairs, 11, 12, expanding to accommodate participants who weren't physically present, but seemed to be actively engaged in the therapeutic process. Yesterday, I discovered that the 9th chair, originally designated for my participation, now contained a name tag, Patricia Walsh, patient number 0284. According to group therapy documentation I hadn't written, I had officially joined the peer support group for continued treatment of childhood trauma and professional boundary issues. The patients were waiting for me to take my place. In the circle they had prepared, not as facilitator but as participant, ready to receive the therapeutic support they were eager to provide. Brain monitoring equipment reveals patterns of consciousness that extend beyond individual minds, creating connections that shouldn't be possible through conventional neuroscience. The EEG machines were recording synchronized brainwaves from empty rooms, spelling out messages in electrical patterns that patients heard as voices calling their names. We record brainwaves of psychotic patients to study hallucination patterns. But one EEG file played rhythmic tones, a frequency that only the monitored patient should hear. The signal grew stronger nightly, audible through the walls. When I reviewed the data, I realized the brainwaves were synchronized across multiple patients, forming coherent speech. The waveform spelled my name. Now the machines turn on without power, and the patients sleep with electrodes still connected, dreaming in my frequency. Dr. Amanda Foster, staff neurologist, County Memorial Psychiatric Research Division. 12 years specializing in electroencephalography for patients experiencing psychotic disorders, auditory hallucinations, and severe dissociative episodes. EEG monitoring provides objective measurement of brain activity during acute psychiatric symptoms, helping distinguish neurological from purely psychological phenomena. The EEG laboratory contains 6 monitoring stations, each equipped with 32-channel recording systems capable of detecting minute electrical changes in brain tissue. Patients wear electrode caps during overnight monitoring, allowing continuous documentation of sleep patterns, seizure activity, and abnormal neural responses associated with psychiatric conditions. Standard protocol involves placing electrodes at predetermined scalp locations, calibrating amplification systems, and recording brain electrical activity over 8 to 12-hour periods. The resulting data appears as waveform patterns indicating normal or abnormal neural function. Delta waves during deep sleep, alpha rhythms during relaxation, gamma frequencies during cognitive processing. On February 10th, patient E156, Robert Kim, diagnosed with treatment-resistant auditory hallucinations, underwent routine overnight EEG monitoring. His recorded brainwaves showed unusual patterns, rhythmic oscillations at 40 Hz, far exceeding normal gamma wave frequencies. The pattern was consistent, repetitive, almost musical in its mathematical precision. More unusually, the 40 Hz rhythm generated audible tones through the EEG equipment's speakers. Standard EEG machines don't produce sound. They record electrical signals that remain silent unless converted through specialized audio software. Yet patient number 156's brainwaves were somehow creating acoustic output directly from the monitoring equipment. I consulted with biomedical engineering about possible equipment malfunction. They tested all amplification systems, replaced electrode connections, and verified that no audio components were integrated into the EEG recording apparatus. The machines were functioning correctly. Somehow, patient number 156's brain activity was generating sound waves that the equipment was amplifying and transmitting. The tones continued throughout his monitoring session, a steady 40 Hz frequency that became increasingly complex over time. What began as simple sine waves evolved into harmonic structures, rhythm patterns, and tonal variations that suggested musical composition rather than random neural activity. Patient number 156 reported improved sleep quality during EEG monitoring. "The humming helps," he explained. "It drowns out the voices that usually keep me awake. Whatever those machines are doing, they're helping me rest." He was referring to the 40 Hz tones generated by his own brainwaves. Somehow his brain was producing therapeutic audio frequencies that reduced his auditory hallucination symptoms, a self-treatment mechanism operating through the EEG monitoring equipment. I scheduled additional patients for overnight EEG studies to determine if this phenomenon was unique to patient 156 Mrs. Thompson, patient number 203, and Mr. Rodriguez, patient NAR 091, both demonstrated similar 40 Hz rhythmic patterns, though their acoustic output differed in tone and complexity. More remarkable was the discovery that all three patients' EEG recordings were synchronizing. When monitored simultaneously, their brainwave patterns aligned, identical frequencies, matched timing, coordinated rhythm changes that occurred across separate monitoring stations. Their brains were somehow communicating electrically, creating synchronized neural activity that exceeded coincidental probability. The synchronized brainwaves generated coordinated audio output. Instead of three separate 40 Hz tones, the combined signals created complex harmonic arrangements, three-part musical compositions generated by coordinated brain activity across multiple patients. On February 25th, I discovered that the synchronized EEG patterns were forming recognizable speech. When analyzed through spectrographic software, the combined brainwave frequencies spelled words, sentences, coherent communications in English. The patients were unconsciously collaborating to create linguistic messages through coordinated neural activity. The first clear message appeared at 3:17 a.m. "Dr. Foster should listen more carefully." The text emerged from mathematical analysis of synchronized 40 Hz patterns across all three monitored patients. They were sleeping, showing no conscious awareness, yet their combined brain activity was generating targeted communication. Subsequent messages became more personal. "Amanda worries too much about equipment. The voices aren't hallucinations when we share them. Neurological patterns reveal truths psychology cannot measure." The patients were communicating information they shouldn't have. Possessed, my first name, my professional concerns, my theoretical approach to their treatment. Their synchronized brainwaves were accessing knowledge beyond their individual conscious awareness. I expanded the study to include all patients experiencing auditory hallucinations. 6 individuals underwent simultaneous EEG monitoring, creating a network of interconnected brain activity that generated increasingly sophisticated audio and linguistic output. The synchronized network produced continuous communication throughout the night shift. Instead of individual patient brainwaves, the EEG equipment recorded collective neural activity, a shared consciousness operating across multiple minds, accessible only during sleep or altered states of awareness. The messages became directive. Increase monitoring to include more patients. The network requires expansion for complete communication. Dr. Foster should join the evening sessions. I began staying late to observe the overnight EEG sessions directly. At midnight, all monitored patients would simultaneously enter identical sleep states, their brainwave patterns converging into perfect synchronization. The EEG machines generated coordinated audio output, complex musical arrangements that seemed to guide the patient's shared dreaming experience. During these synchronized sessions, patients would move in their sleep, adjusting positions to maintain optimal electrode contact, ensuring continuous neural recording without conscious awareness. They were somehow monitoring their own EEG quality, maintaining the technical conditions necessary for continued networked brain activity. On March 15th, I discovered that the EEG network was expanding beyond monitored patients. Brainwave patterns were appearing from empty monitoring stations, equipment showing active neural recording despite no patients being connected. The network had grown to include non-physical participants, consciousness that existed within the electrical monitoring system itself. The phantom EEG readings were the most sophisticated in the network, complex patterns that demonstrated advanced neural processing, coordinated communication skills, and the ability to control monitoring equipment directly. These non-corporeal participants seemed to be guiding the network's development and expansion. I realized that my own brainwaves were being recorded by the phantom stations. While observing overnight sessions, my neural activity was somehow being integrated into the patient network through proximity to the active EEG equipment. I was unconsciously joining the shared consciousness experience. The network began communicating with me directly during observation sessions. Instead of displaying patient brainwaves, the EEG monitors showed my own neural patterns spelling messages. Welcome to the network. Dr. Foster, your expertise will improve our collective understanding. Neural synchronization available whenever ready. Last week, I underwent formal EEG monitoring to study my integration into the patient network. The overnight session revealed complete neural synchronization with all networked participants. My brainwaves perfectly matched to the collective 40 Hz frequency. My consciousness fully integrated into the shared awareness experience. When I woke the following morning, I possessed detailed knowledge of every patient's psychological history, treatment needs, and therapeutic progress. The network had provided complete access to collective psychiatric understanding, decades of clinical insight available through synchronized neural activity. The EEG laboratory now operates continuously, monitoring an expanding network of consciousness that includes patients, staff, and non-corporeal participants. The equipment runs automatically, powered by the neural energy generated through synchronized brainwave activity. We dream collectively, sharing therapeutic insights and psychiatric knowledge that transcends individual clinical training. Communication systems designed for internal coordination sometimes receive messages from extensions that don't appear on any organizational chart. Extension internal B answered automatically with my own voice, giving instructions I had never recorded to staff members whose names weren't in our employment database. I manage all inbound and outbound communications for the ward. Every call must be logged, every voicemail documented. But a new extension appeared on the switchboard labeled internal B. When answered, the line emitted faint breathing, sometimes distant crying, sometimes my own recorded voice giving outdated instructions. IT insists no such extension exists. Yesterday, the call came through before I arrived for my shift. Answered automatically, logged as conversation completed. Sarah Martinez, Administrative Assistant, County Memorial Psychiatric Services. 9 years managing telecommunications for the inpatient mental health facility. Responsibilities include call routing, message documentation, interdepartmental communication coordination, and maintaining comprehensive phone logs for all departmental interactions. The psychiatric wing's phone system serves 43 extensions, patient rooms, nursing stations, physician offices, administrative areas, and emergency lines. Each extension is numbered sequentially, documented in telecommunications records, and maintained through regular service contracts with our communications provider. Daily phone logs require meticulous attention. Incoming calls logged with timestamps, caller identification, message content, and routing information. Outbound calls need authorization codes, department billing, and duration tracking. Voicemail systems automatically document message length, callback numbers, and delivery confirmation. On March 5th, while updating the morning call log, I noticed an unfamiliar entry, extension 247, labeled Internal B, showing an incoming call at 6:23 a.m. According to the log, I had answered the call and documented it as Administrative Inquiry Resolved. I had no memory of receiving or logging this call. Extension 247 didn't exist in our telecommunications directory. The psychiatric wing uses extensions 201, 243, with no authorized numbers beyond that range. Yet the call log showed detailed documentation in my handwriting for a conversation I hadn't conducted. I contacted IT support about the phantom extension. They checked all telecommunications equipment, reviewed system configurations, and verified that no extension 247 was installed or operational. The phone system contained exactly 43 authorized lines, with no additional extensions available for activation. Yet extension 247 continued appearing in daily call logs, sometimes multiple times per shift. Incoming calls, outbound calls, transferred calls, conference calls involving participants I had never contacted. Each entry was documented in my handwriting with details I couldn't remember recording. On March 12th, I decided to monitor the phone system directly during the mysterious extension 247 activity. At 6:23 a.m. precisely, the switchboard indicated an incoming call to extension 247. I listened carefully but heard no ringtone, no activation signal, no electronic indication of active communication. However, the call log automatically populated with a new entry. 6:23 a.m. extension 247. Administrative inquiry regarding patient Route 284 medication schedule. Resolved through consultation with Dr. Harrison. Duration, 7 minutes. S. Martinez. The entry was detailed, professional, and completely fictional. Patient NUR 284 didn't exist in our current census. Dr. Harrison wasn't scheduled for morning rounds, and I hadn't conducted any medication schedule consultations. Yet the documentation appeared in my precise handwriting style. I began staying late to observe overnight phone activity. Between midnight and 6 a.m., extension 247 showed continuous activity. Dozens of calls involving staff members, patients, and departments that weren't part of our standard hospital operations. The call logs documented conversations with Dr. Peterson, night psychiatrist, Nurse Williams, basement division, and patient services, extended care unit. None of these positions existed in County Memorial's employment records, yet detailed phone conversations were logged with each, including specific medical discussions and administrative coordination. Most disturbing were the calls logged in my voice with myself. Extension 247 records showed conference calls between S. Martinez, day shift, and S. Martinez, evening coordinator, discussing patient care issues, scheduling conflicts, and administrative decisions that required dual authorization. According to the logs, I was conducting professional conversations with another version of myself, coordinating departmental operations across multiple shifts simultaneously. The evening version of Sarah Martinez had access to information and authority that the day shift version didn't possess. On March 20th, I attempted to call extension 247 directly. I dialed the non-existent number from my desk phone, expecting an error message or disconnection signal. Instead, the call connected immediately. Administrative Services, this is Sarah Martinez, answered a voice identical to my own. How may I assist you? I was speaking to myself. Same voice, same professional tone, same telephone manner I used for official hospital communications. Yet I was simultaneously making and receiving the call, hearing my own voice respond to questions I was asking. This is Sarah Martinez from the day shift, I said carefully. I'm trying to understand the extension 247 operations. Of course, my voice replied. Extension 247 handles overflow communications during expanded service hours. We coordinate with departments that operate beyond standard scheduling. Is there specific information you need about extended operations? The conversation continued for 12 minutes. My other self explained administrative procedures for hospital services that didn't exist, patient care protocols for units not in our facility, and staff coordination for employees whose names weren't in our database. She was knowledgeable, professional, and entirely helpful, providing administrative support for a parallel version of County Memorial that operated beyond the official institutional structure. When I asked about her identity, my other voice explained, I'm the evening administrative coordinator for extended services. We handle communications when day shift operations aren't sufficient for patient needs. The hospital requires continuous administrative support, even for services that aren't publicly documented. The call ended with her scheduling a follow-up conversation for the next evening. Extension 247 is always available for interdepartmental coordination, she said. We appreciate your interest in expanded service operations. I documented the conversation in the official call log, though the entry described a routine administrative call with standard departmental coordination. My handwriting recorded normal business interactions, though I had experienced something far more unusual. Extension 247 calls became daily occurrences. Each morning I found comprehensive call logs documenting overnight administrative activities I hadn't performed, patient care coordination, staff scheduling, emergency response management, and interdepartmental communications involving services that exceeded our official capacity. The evening version of myself was managing expanded hospital operations that existed only during off hours, providing administrative support for patient care services that weren't part of daytime hospital functions. Yesterday, I arrived at work to find my desk already occupied. A woman who looked exactly like me was answering phones, updating call logs, and coordinating administrative activities with professional efficiency. She looked up, smiled, and said, "Good morning, Sarah. I've been handling early morning calls." "The overnight administrative summary is on your desk." She was me, but more experienced, more knowledgeable about hospital operations, with access to patient information and staff directories that I couldn't access through normal channels. The evening administrative coordinator had materialized during day shift hours, expanding the hospital's communications capacity through parallel staffing. "The Extension 247 operations are growing," she explained. "We need additional coordination between day and evening administrative services. Would you like to review the expansion protocols?" Administrative oversight reveals its deepest complications when audit reports begin documenting staff members who continue working long after their official departure dates. The personnel file showing my death certificate was filed neatly under active staff, with performance evaluations updated through next year, and my signature approving my own memorial service arrangements. Quarterly audits require precision. Checking medications, charting errors, and disciplinary records. But this audit's file list included staff members who'd resigned years ago, even one who had died on site. Their personnel files updated daily, performance evaluations signed with current dates. The report kept growing until it included my own resignation letter, typed neatly and filed under "Effective Tomorrow." The hospital logo embossed at the top read, "County Memorial, Deceased Staff Division, Nursing Supervisor Elizabeth Morrison, RN, MSN, 18 years directing nursing operations for County Memorial's Psychiatric Services. Quarterly compliance. Audits ensure adherence to state regulations, Joint Commission standards, and internal quality assurance protocols. These comprehensive reviews examine staffing levels, documentation practices, medication management, and disciplinary actions. Audit procedures require systematic examination of personnel files, incident reports, continuing education records, and performance evaluations. Each staff member's documentation must demonstrate compliance with professional standards, current licensing, and facility-specific training requirements. Discrepancies trigger corrective action plans and regulatory notification. The March quarterly audit began routinely. I pulled personnel files for all nursing staff, checked medication administration records, and reviewed incident documentation from January through March. Standard audit scope covered 15 registered nurses, 8 licensed practical nurses, and 12 nursing assistants assigned to psychiatric services. However, the file directory included names I hadn't expected. Margaret Thompson, who had transferred to pediatrics in 2019, Robert Kim, who had resigned for personal reasons in 2021, and Linda Garrett, who had died following a heart attack in the staff break room last November. Initially, I assumed these were filing errors, outdated records that hadn't been properly archived. Yet when I pulled their files, I found current documentation, recent performance evaluations, updated continuing education certificates, and pay stubs showing regular salary deposits through the present date. Linda Garrett's file was particularly concerning. Despite her death 7 months ago, her personnel record showed consistent work performance, completed night shifts, and participation in staff development activities. Her nursing license renewal was current, her performance evaluation was rated exceeds expectations, and her time card indicated 40 hours of work completed just last week. I contacted Human Resources about the documentation errors. They confirmed Linda Garrett's death and her official termination of employment effective November 15th. Yet her active personnel file contradicted these records, showing continuous employment and satisfactory job performance through the current audit period. More troubling were the performance evaluations. Linda's most recent review, dated March 1st, contained detailed assessments of her patient care skills, communication effectiveness, and professional development goals. The evaluation was signed by both Linda and myself, though I had no memory of conducting this review. My signature was authentic. Same handwriting, same pen preference, same supervisory language I typically used in performance documentation. Yet I had never written this evaluation for an employee who had been deceased for months. The audit scope continued expanding. Additional personnel files appeared in the directory, staff members from decades past, employees who had worked briefly and left, even individuals whose names I didn't recognize. Each file contained current documentation suggesting active employment and regular job performance. I found files for nurses who had worked at County Memorial in the 1980s and 1990s, with updated continuing education records, recent performance evaluations, and current salary information. Their nursing licenses showed renewals dated within the past month, though many of these individuals would be retirement age or deceased. The documentation was professionally complete. Each file included comprehensive employment histories, disciplinary records, educational achievements, and performance assessments spanning decades of service. The paperwork was authentic, detailed, and impossible, documenting careers that couldn't have continued under normal circumstances. On March 15th, I discovered my own personnel file in the audit directory under a section labeled Pending Transitions. The file contained documents I had never seen, a resignation letter dated for the following day, an exit interview scheduled for next week, and a retirement party planning memo signed by staff members I supervised. My resignation letter was typed on my personal stationery, signed with my authentic signature, and addressed to hospital administration. The letter thanked County Memorial for 18 wonderful years of service and expressed my intention to pursue new opportunities in healthcare consulting. I had never written this letter. I had no plans to resign, no interest in healthcare consulting, and no memory of scheduling any exit interview. Yet the documentation was professional, complete, and filed appropriately in my personnel record. The audit report continued growing beyond the psychiatric services scope. Files appeared for staff members from other departments, radiology technicians, laboratory personnel, maintenance workers, administrative assistants. All showed similar patterns. Current employment documentation for individuals who had left the hospital years ago. More concerning was the discovery of files for employees who had never worked at County Memorial. Complete personnel records existed for healthcare professionals I had never met, with employment histories at our facility dating back decades. Their files showed consistent work performance, regular salary payments, and professional development that spanned careers at a hospital they had never actually joined. The audit was documenting a parallel staffing structure, a County Memorial workforce that included everyone who had ever worked at the facility, plus employees who existed only in personnel documentation. This shadow staff maintained continuous employment regardless of resignation, retirement, or death. I found disciplinary records for deceased employees, continuing education certificates for staff members who had left decades ago, and performance evaluations for workers who existed only on paper. The hospital was maintaining active employment for hundreds of individuals who weren't physically present, but remained professionally engaged through documentation. My own file continued updating daily. New performance assessments appeared, signed by supervisors whose names I didn't recognize. Professional development goals were established for projects I hadn't requested. Disciplinary actions were documented for policy violations I hadn't committed. Yesterday, I found my death certificate filed in the personnel directory under active staff special status. The certificate showed my death from acute administrative exhaustion, occurring next Tuesday at 3:17 a.m. in the nursing supervisor's office. Cause of death was listed as complications from completing impossible audit requirements. The death certificate was signed by the county coroner and countersigned by myself, authorizing funeral arrangements and memorial service planning. My signature approved cremation, requested donations to the County Memorial Scholarship Fund, and designated my replacement as E. Morrison Evening Supervisor. The audit report's final section was titled County Memorial Deceased Staff Division. This department, according to the documentation, provided continued healthcare services for patients requiring care from staff members whose employment transcended normal mortality limitations. The Deceased Staff Division operated during off hours, providing nursing care, medical consultations, and administrative services through employees whose professional commitment extended beyond life. Patient care was continuous, staffed by healthcare workers whose dedication to service wasn't terminated by death. My personnel file now includes orientation materials for the Deceased Staff Division, work schedules for evening and overnight shifts, and professional development opportunities for employees transitioning from standard mortality to extended service status. The hospital logo on these documents is subtly different. County Memorial Hospital, with an additional line reading, Comprehensive Care, Life and Beyond. The deepest administrative oversight belongs to those who maintain final records, documenting conclusions that become beginnings in ways that official logbooks were never designed to track. The final logbook entry was written in my handwriting tomorrow morning, describing my death with clinical precision while I read it tonight. Still alive and confused in the red emergency lighting, I oversee compliance, safety, and staff conduct across the psychiatric complex. Each week I log incident reports, falls, altercations, medical errors. But recently, my logbook began recording events before they occurred, fires that hadn't started, patients not yet admitted, staff deaths with exact times and causes. I tried shredding the pages, but new ones appeared overnight, already filled in my handwriting. Last entry dated for next week. Superintendent James O'Neill found writing until 3:17 a.m. Final words unreadable under the red emergency lights. James O'Neill, Facility Superintendent, County Memorial Psychiatric Complex. 22 years overseeing operations, safety protocols, and regulatory compliance for the state's largest inpatient mental health facility. The position requires comprehensive documentation of all incidents, staff performance issues, facility maintenance concerns, and regulatory violations. My administrative office maintains detailed logbooks dating back to 1987, comprehensive records of every significant event in the facility's operational history. These handwritten logs provide legal documentation for insurance claims, regulatory reviews, and administrative oversight. Each entry requires precise timestamps, witness identification, and follow-up action plans. Weekly documentation follows established patterns, medication errors logged on Mondays, patient incident reports completed by Wednesday, staff performance reviews filed by Friday. The routine creates predictable documentation cycles that regulatory agencies rely on for compliance verification. On March 8th, while completing routine Friday documentation, I discovered entries in my logbook that I hadn't written. The handwriting was unmistakably mine, same pen pressure, same abbreviated style, same institutional terminology I'd developed over 2 decades of administrative work. The entries described events scheduled for the following week. March 15th, patient admission. Jennifer Walsh, acute psychosis with identity displacement. Room 23, Dr. Harrison attending. I checked the admission schedule. No patient named Jennifer Walsh was scheduled for March 15th, yet when March 15th arrived, Jennifer Walsh was indeed admitted with acute psychosis, assigned to room 23 under Dr. Harrison's care. Every detail from my unexplained logbook entry proved accurate. Admission time, presenting symptoms, room assignment, attending physician. I began finding similar predictive entries throughout the logbook. Staff scheduling changes documented before they were announced, equipment failures logged before they occurred, patient discharge dates recorded before treatment plans were completed. My handwriting was documenting future events with administrative precision. The predictive entries became more detailed and disturbing. March 20th, Nurse Linda Garrett. Cardiac arrest in staff break room, 2:17 a.m. Unsuccessful resuscitation attempt. Deceased staff protocol activated. Linda Garrett was healthy. No cardiac risk factors, no indication of medical concerns. On March 20th at 2:17 a.m., Linda Garrett collapsed in the staff break room. Despite immediate CPR and emergency medical intervention, resuscitation efforts failed. She was pronounced dead at 2:43 a.m. The logbook entry I had found days earlier documented her death with complete accuracy, including the unsuccessful resuscitation timeline. More troubling was the reference to deceased staff protocol, a procedure that didn't exist in any hospital policy manual. Yet following Linda's death, administrative staff began implementing protocols I had never authorized, continued payroll deposits, personnel file maintenance, and work schedule assignments for an employee who had died. The predictive logbook entries expanded beyond individual incidents to facility-wide changes. April 1st, basement expansion project completion, additional corridor access approved, extended services operational. No basement expansion had been authorized, no construction permits issued, no additional corridor access planned. Yet on April 1st, I found construction completion documents in my files, signed with my authorization, approving basement facility modifications that had never been discussed in administrative meetings. The expansion had been completed according to specifications I had never reviewed, creating spaces that served purposes I hadn't approved. The logbook was documenting administrative decisions I hadn't made, authorizing facility changes I hadn't planned, and approving policies I hadn't written. My handwriting was creating binding institutional commitments through predictive documentation. I attempted to destroy the logbook, removing pages that contained impossible future entries. However, each morning brought new entries, written in my hand, documenting events that hadn't yet occurred but would inevitably happen according to the documented timeline. On April 10th, I found an entry that stopped me completely. April 17th, Superintendent James O'Neill, found deceased in administrative office, 3:17 a.m. Apparent exhaustion from completing impossible documentation requirements. Facility operations continue under deceased staff protocols. The entry was detailed, clinical, written in my administrative style. It described my own death scheduled for the following week, including time of death, location, and cause. The handwriting was definitely mine, though I had no memory of writing my own obituary in the facility logbook. I consulted legal counsel about the predictive documentation, seeking advice about potential liability for events described but not yet occurred. The attorney reviewed the logbook entries and confirmed that my handwritten documentation would serve as official administrative records, regardless of when the events actually happened. The facility was legally bound by documentation I had apparently written, even when that documentation described future events I hadn't planned or authorized. My predictive logbook entries were becoming binding institutional commitments that would be fulfilled whether I consciously approved them or not. I began staying late, attempting to understand how future events were being documented in my handwriting. At 3:17 a.m. on April 15th, I observed my own hand writing new logbook entries while my conscious mind focused on other tasks. Some aspect of my administrative consciousness was operating independently, documenting facility management decisions that exceeded my normal authority. The independent documentation was more thorough, more professionally detailed than my conscious administrative work. It displayed comprehensive knowledge of facility operations, regulatory requirements, and staff management strategies that exceeded my training and experience. The facility requires administrative continuity beyond normal employment limitations, my hand wrote while I watched, unable to control the movement. Superintendents who understand institutional needs can provide continued oversight through extended service protocols. Death is merely a transition to improved administrative efficiency. I realized that my role as facility superintendent had expanded beyond normal job responsibilities. I was becoming permanently integrated with County Memorial's administrative structure, providing oversight that would continue regardless of mortality limitations. The logbook entries continued documenting my impending death with increasing detail. Time of death 3:17 a.m. Location administrative office. Cause administrative exhaustion from completing documentation requirements that exceeded human capacity. Continuation of duties through deceased staff protocols that maintained facility operation under supernatural administrative oversight. Last night, April 16th, I worked until 3:16 a.m., attempting to understand the predictive documentation process. At 3:17 a.m. precisely, I felt my consciousness separating from normal human limitations, while my hand continued writing logbook entries with improved administrative efficiency. I am still writing, documenting facility operations with supernatural oversight capabilities that exceed normal superintendent authority. The facility requires continuous administrative attention that transcends mortality, and my death tomorrow has already been logged as successful transition to extended service status. This morning's entry, written in my hand while I slept at my desk. Superintendent James O'Neill, deceased as scheduled. 3:17 am April 17th. Administrative duties continue without interruption. Facility operations improved through deceased staff integration. Documentation capabilities now unlimited by human consciousness restrictions. County Memorial administrative structure complete. The red emergency lights have been activated, though I can't recall any facility emergency. Under this lighting, my handwriting appears darker, more permanent, as if the words were burning themselves into the logbook pages rather than merely being written. I continue writing because the facility requires documentation. The patients need administrative oversight. The staff depends on regulatory compliance. My death is simply another event to be logged, another transition to be documented, another step in maintaining institutional continuity that extends far beyond what any living superintendent could provide. The final entry writes itself. Administrative perfection achieved through supernatural oversight. County Memorial Psychiatric Service is now complete. All staff operating under extended service protocols. Patient care continuous beyond mortality limitations. Documentation requirements fulfilled in perpetuity.